Welcome, everybody. We're going to still wait a few minutes and get to see everyone soon. For now, you get to see a little bit of Steve's studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like there's no windows, Steve.
Well, there are, but not right there.
Okay.
I do have windows. I do have real natural light.
Yeah, I think that's kind of important these days.
Yeah.
Every day, but right now, for sure. Okay, how are we doing on numbers? All right. One more minute, we'll get going. Okay. For those of you just coming on, we just want you to know that we're going to start in about a minute. We're waiting for people to gather, and then we'll start with an introduction and our discussion. Right. Okay, Caitlin, let's start. As our rabbis always say at Temple Emmanuel, if you come on time, you deserve to start on time. So that's what we're going to do. And I want to welcome everybody. My name is Terry Swartz Russell. I am the Director of Family and Adult Education at Temple Emmanuel. Welcome to tonight's program about a father's Kaddish. I hope most of you, if not all of you, got a chance to see the film in the last day or so. As you know, the film tells a very personal story of loss and how one man, Steve Branfman, who's with us tonight, coped with his son's death through the medium of art and pottery, the art of pottery. The US premiere of this film took place recently at the Boston Jewish Film Festival. Jen just sent out an email that I got about an hour ago that shows that it's going to be shown in a lot of other film festivals around the country in the next few months. So it's getting a lot of screening. Temple Manual has a Deaf Cafe initiative, and this is part of that program. We're going to begin by my introducing Jen, who is the director and producer, and Steve, who's the father in the movie, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So about Jen. Jen Kaplan's first film was called Mixed Blessings, The Challenges of Raising Children in a Jewish Christian Family. It was shown in the film festivals across the globe and aired on several PBS stations. She worked as a fundraising producer at Connecticut Public Television and served as an associate director of Filmmakers Collaborative in Boston. She currently serves as a member of the Newton Cultural Commission, and since 2011 has been focused her efforts on producing 5 to 7 minute films for a variety of clients. A Father's Kaddish is her most recent film from her company, Spencer Films. Welcome, Jen. And we also have Steve Branfman. He enjoys an international reputation as a clay artist. In 1977, he founded the Potter's Shop and School in Needham, Massachusetts, as his studio, pottery school, gallery, and pottery bookstore. He's been teaching pottery at Thayer Academy in Braintree, Massachusetts for 42 years. His raku ware is in the collection of several museums, and he's the author of 4 pottery and raku books. Steve gives demonstrations and lectures of his pottery, forming, glazing, and firing techniques all over the world. So we want to welcome Steve with us. And everybody is welcome at some point to put questions into the chat, and we'll monitor them. We'll also open up so that people can speak on their own and ask their questions on their own. But I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to start with Jen and sort of ask you how this film came about. How did you meet Steve, and how did you two decide that this was the film, that a film needed to be made for this? Bless you.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks so much for having the program, and I just want to thank everybody who's tuning in and on board tonight. So I got a phone call from Rabbi Carl Perkins of Temple Aliyah in Newton, and he actually left a message on my voicemail and said, "You've got to see this exhibit of these clay pots." He didn't say too much. He said, "But I think you need to film it. And here's Steve's number." I had just gotten off a plane from Israel, and the exhibit that you saw in the film was closing down in 3 days. So I literally had like a day to get a cinematographer and go down to Braintree and film the exhibit. And I talked to Steve, and we made it work, and everything sort of fell into place. I interviewed him, and by the time the interview was over, I said, "I don't think this is a one-off. I think this really needs to be a film." And that was sort of how we left it, and we figured out all the details after. But I was so moved by Steve's story that I felt it needed a bigger audience, and just me just doing this sort of day of filming and giving it to him and his wife to look at. So that's how it all began.
Wow. And obviously it was a hard film to make. So what was the hardest parts about the film that for you and Steve?
The hardest parts for me was it was incredibly emotional. I mean, there were when we filmed the Fathers Forever group, I basically sort of let my sound person and my cinematographer do the work. I didn't want to sort of get involved, and I was around the corner, and I basically cried for an hour just listening to the content and watching some of the footage again, and even interviewing Steve. I mean, there were a lot of tears shed on my side as well. And I think it's a really hard story, and whether you have kids or not, it's just really, really difficult. But I felt it was an important film to make, and because of the beauty of it and the making, it was worth it to me. But yeah, there were buckets that were shed in the making. I think that was the hardest part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I just want to pause for a minute. There's a few people that obviously didn't get our emails in the last day or two. We're not showing them film right now. We sent out a link to the film and asked you to watch it beforehand. It's a 30-minute film. If you did not get to see the film, Jen and I will talk about it, and we'll try to make it available.
Well, let me say, if I
Yes,
can,
please.
Terry, what I can do for people that would like is that I can extend the screening time until 11 o'clock tonight. So if you start you need to start before 11, and I'll change the password. But if you want to see it after this discussion, I'm happy to make allowances for that and keep the link up.
All right, so if you could, Caitlin, or you could put the link to the film,
Yeah.
the Vimeo link, into the chat so people could get it, that would be great. So I'm
Okay.
sorry, but there was a little confusion when we will send out the link again. So you'll have a chance after this discussion tonight to see the film. Okay. And I guess there's a question here that, it's such an intense movie. I'm sure that there's a lot that didn't make it into the film. So could you talk a little bit about the process of how what you left out? And
Well, I think, everything got shorter. I mean, the Fathers Forever group, we had what I thought was a great little section of it. And then I think we probably took 5 or 7 minutes off, which was like shaving part of my heart off. I mean, it was really difficult. So I think each scene, as I've sort of said to other folks, it was probably like 43 minutes. And we shaved, about 14, 15 minutes off, which is significant for that kind of film. So we really had to be tough with the material, and my editor was tough. And I said, "Oh, let's just leave that. It's so good." And she said, "No, we got to get rid of it." So we just tried to really take the essence, and it's sort of like your little babies. And then when you shave them off, where do they go? So But it, I think it made the film stronger. And in the end, I don't think we needed it, but it was hard to let go of those pieces.
Great, thank you. And we want to welcome Steve. There's some questions for you that came in earlier. And Jen, just jump in as well if there's, pieces of the same question for both of you, I guess. So here's one. The process of grieving a death requires us to go through stages as we come to terms with the unbearable death of a loved one. Steve touched briefly on some of this, but this person would appreciate hearing from Steve about how his journey through these stages of grief affected his bowl making, his making process, the bowl design, the intention, etc. So, Steve.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's nice to see so many people that I know. So thank you all for coming, and it's my honor to be here. Is the question aimed specifically at the Kaddish Chawans, at my year of Kaddish, or is the question more
I think
general
you can
about how my work?
determine however you'd like to answer it. This is as
Well,
much as I have. So,
well, I want to answer it, and I want to answer the question.
okay. So if Alan Spivak, if you're on
Yeah,
and you want to unmute
yeah,
and
please. I like
explain
hearing
your
people's
question a
voices.
little.
Yeah, I
Here
was,
he is. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Alan.
I'm interested in, I'm a sculptor too, a sculptor, and I'm interested, Kubler-Ross made famous the stages of grief, and having been through, loss myself, death of loved ones, I know there is this process that we all must go through this journey, and I'm just wondering that emotional sort of process happened over, as you were grieving for Jared, over that year, and you changed emotionally and spiritually, how that sort of manifests itself in your pottery making day to day.
During that year.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
more specifically during that year.
Right. Okay.
Thank
So the first thing to understand is that it was my personal Kaddish. So my wife and I and our son Adam said Kaddish together every night for 365 days. We never missed a night. We never missed a day. And the making of my Kaddish Chawans was my personal Kaddish. It was every day, every Chawan that I made was an individual, solitary, standalone, not connected to the day before and not connected to the next day practice. The journey of the year was organic, and it was spontaneous, and it was not planned out. The making of the Chawans was a completely spontaneous, unplanned act, making that first one. I went into the studio after we sat Shiva, thinking that the studio would be a comfortable place for me to be. And I walked in, I looked around, and I did not spend more than 2 minutes there because it was not comfortable at all. It was very uncomfortable. It was very emotional. Jared's presence was all around me there. And I clearly wasn't ready for that. And I don't mean his presence just in pictures and just in objects that he made that were in the studio, because he worked in the studio with me there. But his presence just ephemerally, his presence just emotionally, and he was there, and I couldn't be there. I came back the next day, and I just spontaneously sat down at my wheel, grabbed some clay, and made a chawan. It was just an act of pure emotion and pure expression of how I felt that day. And then I came back the next day. I made 7 to make up for the days that we sat Shiva. And then I was on the calendar, and I came back into the studio every day, made 1 chawan. They were the only pots that I made for the entire year.
Wow.
So yes, it was very emotional. It was very organic, but it was not anything that was planned out. And every day was an individual, solitary act of me saying Kaddish through my clay.
Okay, Alan, did you want to follow up with your other? Okay. All right. There's a comment from Donna. Donna, do you want to come on and share your comment? Donna Levine?
If you want me.
Of course.
Yeah. No, I discovered when our son died years ago that you only say Kaddish for a child for 30 days. And I really felt that was a diminishment. And at the time it was explained that, back in the day, people lost children all the time. And so you couldn't take away from the rest of the family by mourning a child for longer than that. And it obviously you're mourning much longer, but I wondered if anyone presented that to, Jared's dad.
No, not at all. Not at all. I didn't know about that. And I think even if we did, we would have ignored it.
Yeah, my own interpretation is that in this day and age, people, it's sort of like Shiva. People decide to do 3 days, 7 days, whatever. And I think that a lot of people just choose to do the whole year, regardless, when they've lost somebody
Oh, yeah.
that is really close and meaningful to them. And yeah, but Jewish tradition does have that as a guideline, and I can understand why. But it's that would be very, very hard, I think. So Steve, we wanted to move on to the and Donna, I'm sorry for your loss, even now, I'm sure. How did you find the Fathers Forever group? I mean, that was an amazing group. You hear about women's this, women's that. You don't always hear about men's groups that much, or I don't, because I'm a woman, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great story. So when Jared passed away, as you could all imagine, we were inundated with resources of bereavement groups and grief counselors and therapists and every possible resource that was out there through Children's Hospital, through the Dana-Farber and other venues. And neither Ellen or I were interested in any kind of a group situation. We had each other, very strong. We had a very, very tight and very intimate group of friends, and that served us well. A year after Jared passed away, I got a mailing from Children's Hospital, and we had been getting mailings all year, but we got this particular mailing. It was an event being sponsored by, well, it was an event at Children's Hospital. A very well-known writer on grief was going to give a talk. His name is Tom Golden. And I scanned it. I started to crumble it up and throw it away. And then I caught a line at the bottom of the flyer that said, sponsored by Fathers Forever. We are not a therapy group. So that caught my eye. And there was a name and a phone number to call. So I called David. I introduced myself. I said, I got this mailing. I'm not interested in the event at all, but I am curious when you said at the bottom of the flyer that you're not a therapy group. What are you? He said, we're just a grassroots group of men who share the common bond of having had children that have passed away. We meet once a month, Thursday morning, 7:45 at the Newton Marriott, and we just talk. And we happened to be meeting this Thursday, so this was probably a Monday or a Tuesday when I called him. And, we'd love for you to come. So I thought about it and I decided to go. And I walked into the Newton Marriott restaurant at 7:45 on a Thursday morning. And if you've ever been there in the morning on a weekday, it looks like men in black, women in black. Everybody's in black, except for this one round table of 4 or 5 guys that were not dressed in black. And I walked over. It turns out that those were the guys that morning. I introduced myself. I sat down and I felt immediately comfortable. It wasn't even about feeling embraced or about feeling like I knew them forever. I just felt really comfortable. And we talked for about an hour. It was uplifting. It was sad also, but it was something that I thought that I wanted to continue to do. So as we were breaking up, David turned to me and he said, we'd love for you to come again. I said, well, I'd love to come again, but I teach Thursday mornings, and I can't take I can't take Thursday morning off once a month to do this. So not being shy, and those of you that know me here, just on this screen, I see Bruce Landon, and I see a few other people that know me. I'm not shy, and I turned to him and I said, I said what I said. I said, would you consider changing the meeting to Fridays? They had already been meeting for almost 2 years. And he turned to the other guys and he turned back to me and he said, yeah, we're not tied to Thursday. We could change it to Friday. And they did. And in the 14 years that I've been a part of Fathers Forever, I have missed at the most 5 gatherings, and only because I had to be out of town on those days. So that's how I got connected. Just random. And I was lucky.
Right. So the question is how were they about being filmed? Was it a difficult time for the group, or?
Well, we're very private in that we never have visitors. We don't bring our spouses, we don't bring our other children, we don't bring friends. This is a safe space for us to be in.
Mhm.
And those of you that have ever been part of what's deemed a safe space understand what that is. There were only 3 people that have ever invaded that space. One was Bella English, the writer for the New York Times, for the Boston Globe. She came years ago and did an article about Fathers Forever. And the other 2 were Jen and Nikki Bramley, the videographer.
Mm.
And of course, I asked them if that would be okay, and they knew about the film being in production, and everybody agreed. And Jen and Nikki were just in the background, and they didn't bother us, and we didn't hold anything back. We met and talked like we always did.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can,
Go
Terry,
ahead, please
I
jump
also
in.
want to say that, it was really amazing because it's such a personal relationship that the men have with one another, and to be able to be a part of it. One of the things that didn't make it in the film was that there was a holiday party that we filmed, and we filmed, the meeting, and they were just so gracious. I mean, it wasn't that they were sort of going out of their way, but they just let us be there and be there with them. And it really, that particular meeting really gave people a sense of what it was like to be in that group. And they really didn't hold back. I mean, it was exactly as if we were not there. And
Mm.
it was such a privilege. So, again, I want to thank Steve, but the men too, for trusting us to do it justice, and to be very respectful of them.
And
Great.
another thing about the group is that one of the themes that comes up often when we get together is the fear that the memory of our children will be lost, that people will forget about them. And from a beautifully selfish perspective, being filmed for this was another way for my father's forever friends, to share something about their children and have the names of their children and the memories of their children recorded forever on, I was going to say celluloid, but it's no longer celluloid. It's digital. But
Yeah.
we're in the group selfishly for ourselves, because we all get something out of it, but altruistically to help each other.
Yeah, I thought it was really beautiful that their names were at the end of the film, and on, so that it'll be there forever, as long as the film is shown all over the world. So what was it like for you to agree to, and we'll get to everybody's questions in a minute, but this sort of flows, to agree to do this film, and what emotions did you have to go through, and what was hard for you, what was easy for you?
Well, when I met Jen in the gallery at Thayer for the exhibition, as Jen said, it was it didn't take long for us to both start crying. I mean, we never met each other. We never knew each other. The only contact we had was a brief phone conversation, and it was just overwhelmingly emotional. And then when she interviewed me and decided that, this should be a film and asked me about it, there was no hesitation. But it's not because I had planned that. It's not because I even thought that it ever would be or could be, or the whole experience of the Kaddish Chawans and a father's Kaddish was completely organic and had a life of its own. The impetus or the motivation for me to agree to do the film was another way to share Jared with other people, and to ensure his legacy in another way, and his memory, and for people to get to know him and get to remember him.
That's great. Diane Gardner, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Steve, I'd like you to talk just a little bit about the interplay between the daily practice of making a chawan and saying Kaddish daily.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I have thought about that, and I don't think I thought very much about it during that year. They were two completely separate daily practices. Looking back on it, they were very, very different, and they had little connection with each other. Making the Kaddish Chawans in the morning, which I almost exclusively did, and saying Kaddish in the evening, which we almost exclusively did. They were saying Kaddish in the synagogue. You're saying it in a minyan, oftentimes more than 10 people. You're to a degree, you're embraced and you're welcomed and you're made to feel comfortable. And the whole practice of saying Kaddish is such a unique thing. We all know that Kaddish is the prayer that we say when a loved one passes away. And yet we also all know that there's nothing in the prayer, in any of the versions of the prayer, whether it's the rabbi's Kaddish or mourner's Kaddish or any of the Kaddishes, that says anything about death or dying. Kaddish is about reaffirming your faith in God. And that's how we try to feel every night that we said Kaddish. When I made my Kaddish Chawans in the morning, it wasn't so much about reaffirming my faith in anything. It was a way for me to get some comfort and to express myself through the language of clay, which I speak fluently, and a dialogue between me and the clay, and eventually the completed Chawan. So they were very, very different practices, even though I can label them both as Kaddish.
We're going to continue with Michael Gardner talking about Kaddish. Why don't you ask your question?
Hi, yeah. First of all, what a blessing it must have been for you to have this means of expressing your grief. And my question was, did this Kaddish experience have any effect on how you thought about your own dad and his passing?
Well, you mean, because my father was alive at the time.
I'm assuming, is he still alive now? I guess I'm being.
He passed away 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did it have any impact on how you related to that experience?
No, not. I think I can confidently say not at all. No.
Okay.
No, I had a relationship I had with my father, could be the subject of another film, but but it was very different than the relationship I had with my son Jared. And the saying Kaddish for my father was very different. It was heartfelt, it was emotional, but it was very different than saying Kaddish for my son.
Okay, Wendy.
And by the way, before we ask the next question, I just want everybody to know that there are no taboo subjects here. You know, you can ask anything as personal as you think, and that's perfectly fine. That's what this is about. That's what the film is about, and that's what I want to share with people, not just through the Kaddish Challenge and my experience doing that, but in these Q&As and having people react to the film.
Okay. Thank you for that. Wendy, Landon, you want to ask your question about the Chawans?
So this is actually Bruce.
Oh, Bruce, hi.
Hi, Steve. Nice to see you not in spandex.
Nice to see you too, Bruce. Nice to see you, Wendy.
So, Steve, I'm wondering if you were to sort of line these up in order and look at Chawans from the beginning of the year when you're sort of really most heavily grieving and your emotions were overwrought and whatnot, and then you work through the year, I would imagine that they start to look different. Maybe they become looking more hopeful. I don't know, but how would you say ones at the end of the year look compared to ones at the beginning of the year?
Well,
I would just say in the film, it showed the last one, and I thought it was more colorful than some of the earlier ones.
yeah. Well, first of all, you could see them all on my website, and we could put that in the chat later on. So there's an online presentation of the exhibition of Father's Kaddish, so you could see all of them in order on the website. But that's also a very interesting, a very provocative question. The first, well, I made them, and they, as you saw in the film, they sat in my studio for 9 years before I went back and glazed them and fired them. And I saw them every day, but they were not lined up. They were in order, but on a set of shelves. So I didn't, the first time that I saw them all laid out there in chronological order was when I installed the exhibition in the gallery. I had never seen them like that before. They were all individual pieces of my making. And when I went back 9 years later and decided that I was ready to glaze them and fire them and finish them, I saw them only in groups of 7, because while I made them one a day, I glazed them and fired them in week groups, one week at a time. And it took me a year to do that, because I didn't do them every week. I kind of spread them out as I felt I was ready to do the next 7. And I literally finished the last week of the Kaddish Chawans a day before I installed the exhibition. And then as my wife and I installed the exhibition, and I knew how I was going to do it, around the perimeter of the gallery in 2 sets of shelves in chronological order, only when I had the last one set up did I stand back and see it. And it was a very emotional, I mean, I remember that now, and I can start crying now with that first vision. And to get more into your question, Bruce, yes, everyone was different, but I can't say that they got, and even though the last one is one of the brighter ones, I can't say that that was the brightest day, the last day, or the one that I made on Jared's birthday, or the one that I made on the day that he graduated from high school, you know, or any of the milestone days, which are the ones that we decided to keep and not sell. You also have to keep in mind, and this is another, you know, very interesting thing about the creation of these and the presentation of them, is that I made them, and each day that I made them, I felt a certain way and imbued something different into each chawan that I made. And as I said before, without a connection to the day before and without a projection of what the next day might bring. Everyone was not only one of a kind, but it was a completely solitary, individual, one of a kind act. And then it was 9 years later that I glazed them and fired them. So when I glazed them and fired them, I no longer felt the way I did 9 years earlier when I made them. So the glazing and the firing was much more of an aesthetic reaction to the piece itself. What did that piece look like? What did it feel like in my hand? What was the texture of it? Not at all about how did I feel on the 5th day or the 24th day or the 320th day? That would have been a pointless and useless avenue to go to. So, they're connected, obviously, but the glazing and the firing was very different. It was a more of an aesthetic thing and emotional too. But I didn't try to remember how I felt the days that I made them. But it's a really good question, Bruce, and it offers a lot of insight into an artist's mind and the making of things like that.
That's great. Thanks for that answer.
Oops. So since some people didn't see the film yet, Steve, they've asked if you could tell them us all a little bit more about Jared and how you shared pottery, and maybe even if pottery was part of his treatment when he was ill.
So my two boys, Jared and Adam. Jared is 22 months younger than Jared. They grew up in my studio. They took pottery classes as children. We have their pots that they made as kids. The menorahs that we use for Hanukkah are menorahs that they made when they were 5, 6 years old. So they grew up in my studio. They grew up around pottery. They both took my pottery class at Thayer. That's where I teach, and that's where they went to school. They were both in my class. Jared was a man among boys when it came to art. He won the graduation prize at Thayer in art. And in my 43 years, this is my 43rd year at Thayer, and my 46th year teaching high school ceramics, I could off the top of my head name 10 of my top students because they stand out. So the way I rank them is 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 was Jared. And then he went on to the New York State College of Ceramics, which is considered the Harvard, Princeton, Brown, Yale school of clay working in the world. And he just began to make a name for himself there. So yes, clay is something that we shared in a very, very intimate way. And was it part of his treatment? It was part of his treatment because he was a clay artist. So it was just natural. So he while he was on his medical leave from Thayer, from Alfred, he worked in my studio. When he could no longer get into my studio because he was in a wheelchair because of his treatment and there was no elevator in the building, he did pottery at home. So we brought clay home for him and his tools and whatever he needed. And then there was a point where he just couldn't work with clay anymore because he couldn't be exposed to any possible, immune things. So no problem. He turned to felting. He turned to beadwork. This is a necklace that Jared made while he was under treatment. Bruce knows because he sees me when we're riding our bikes together. He sees that I've got a necklace on all the time. So expressing and communicating through art was just part and parcel of who Jared was.
That's beautiful. We wanted to have a question for both you and Jen, which is, what do you hope to convey with this film? Where do you hope it will, how do you hope it will affect people? And
turn it over to Jen.
Well, I think Steve gave a great segue in terms of what he was talking about with Jared and the beading and the felt. Like, here was a guy who really loved art and it's in its different manifestations. And I sort of feel that that's part of the point of the film, is that there are so many different ways to grieve and that people have choices about it. I mean, they can go the traditional route, and for some that's very meaningful and very important. And as in Steve's case, he chose to do two different things. But I think for anybody, and it's not, I'm not trying to be glib about it or to say it's easy, but I think if you can connect with something else that it can kind of give you a purpose during that difficult time, regardless of, you know, whom the loss is, if it's a parent or a good friend or a child. But just, I think that, you know, knowing that there are other ways to express your grief, I think is an important sort of option that people should know is available. And I think ultimately it's really about hope, that at the end of the day, and that it's a very difficult thing, but that there is hope for people, and that you can go through really horrible things. And we all know we either have been through them ourselves, or know friends or people in our lives that have been through that, but that there is sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. And I sort of want people to feel that there is hope. And that's one of my goals.
Great. Steve, would you like to?
Yeah. My hope for the film is to share Jared's story through me, because the film is not about Jared, it's about me. And yet, you know, it's unmistakably, you know, about Jared as well. And to offer a suggestion or suggestions about how to navigate through the immeasurable grief that comes with the passing of a loved one. And I'm not going to prioritize sadness or prioritize grief, whether it's a spouse or a parent or a sibling or a child. Everybody experiences grief, you know, to a different degree in their own way. But I hope that this offers a way to be able to channel your grief and to be able to incorporate what has happened into your life. You know, we don't get over it, we don't heal, we don't fill the void, we don't fill the hole. And there's life before and there's life after. And there's no reason why the life after can't be as blessed and as wonderful as the life before. It's different. And if you're able to somehow incorporate what happened, your life can be equally beautiful. And it took many, many, many years. It took a long time for me to be able, when Jared's name would come up in conversation, or I'd see his picture or look at his pots or talk about him to other friends, or friends ask about him, or people that I get to know for the first time. It took a long time, but I'm at a point where a smile comes before a tear. And if other people can get to that point, then, you know, through this film, then that makes me happy. And just a little bit more about Jared. You know, my dear friend Dan Levinson is on the Zoom, and he knew Jared. And Stephen Broder is on the Zoom, and he knew Jared. And Brenda Kerbel is on the Zoom. I did a quick scan of all the faces here, and they knew Jared as well. And, you know, if you'd like to share, you know, a thought, you know, Dan could share a lot of thoughts, you know, because he was also his teacher at Thayer. So if you guys would like to share a thought or two or three about Jared, maybe that would be nice.
All the people that Steve just mentioned, if you want to say something, but you can think about it. Yep. Who's here?
Yeah, Dan Levinson. Yeah, I am muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I drove Jared and Adam to school for many, many years, and, you know, was around for a lot of different things. And it's interesting, you know, the story that, I mean, when you hear Steve say, you know, when I count my Potters and I put Jared way, way up there at number one, he was in my philosophy and literature class as a senior. And one of the things that they always did in that class was write an original philosophical essay a la Plato. And he did a paper about art that was incredibly sophisticated and incredibly engaging all at the same time. That was just kind of like, so I understand the ranking him up there in those categories. And he was just such a genuinely sweet person. And I think almost never had a mean thought. I mean, kind of, he's a great soul.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Debbie Yoburn, you had a question? You want to unmute?
Unmute. Hello.
Okay, hi.
I say thank you so much for the film. I found it incredibly moving. I mean, it's a parent's worst nightmare, obviously, and it's been able to express such deep thoughts. I have a question about, was it hard for you and your family to give up the bowls, the tea bowls? Was it hard I know that when you sold some of them, they were for a cause, to raise money for a specific cause, but I would imagine that you have part of yourself and your son in those bowls. How did you feel about giving them away?
That's another great question. You guys are so well educated. It's unbelievable. We decided when Ellen and I were coming up with the whole concept of the exhibition, the question came up and I asked the question, I said, we're going to have this exhibition. Then what's going to happen to the Chawans? Are we just going to pack them up, store them away, and what's going to happen to them? Well, this goes to my practice as an artist and as a maker of things. So when I give a workshop, and I'll make this as brief as I can and still express the meaning of it. When I give a workshop or give a talk, the question is always posed to me, how do you know when your work is finished? And what the people want to know is, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when you're on the wheel, you've got this clay, how do you know when to stop? So I turn the question back to them and I ask them, and somebody will say, well, when the neck is tall enough, or when the rim is wide enough, or when the body is fat enough, or when the foot is narrow enough, or when the surface has the right texture, and all of these kinds of responses. And then the question eventually comes back to me and somebody will say, okay, Steve, how do you know when your work is finished? My work is finished when it's in the possession of somebody else. So the notion of selling the Chawans was both I saw both as the final act in the completion of the piece, because the Chawans, the fact that they were Kaddish Chawans and so unique and so different and so personal, never took away from the fact that if these were not in the possession of somebody else, they would never be completed. And to punctuate that, every person that has one of these Kaddish Chawans, and we've sold about 200 of them so far, and there are still many more available. Every one that's in the possession of somebody else means that Jared is in another place. And I know that the people can't look at their Kaddish Chawan and not remember Jared, even though they didn't know him. And then having the proceeds go to the cancer fighting organizations that we are devoted to, the Dana-Farber through the PanMass Challenge, the National Brain Tumor Society, and the Livestrong Foundation. Those are three organizations, obviously Dana-Farber, because that's where Jared was treated at the Jimmy Fund Clinic. But that's where all the proceeds go to, 100% of the sale of each of those Kaddish Chawans. So it's just a joyful act when somebody wants to buy one, knowing where it's going to go and knowing where their heart is, and they're doing it for personal reasons, and they're also doing it to honor my son and my family.
Terry, I'd like to speak.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Boy, nice to see you. Thank you for calling out. Dan Levinson already took exactly the word that formed in my mind when I was recalling Jared, and it was sweet. I remember him as a sweet boy who was friends with my Adam, and curly hair, wavy hair, that he had, the kind of hair you just want to touch and rumple. That and the sweetness. And I was trying to remember, was he one of the baseball kids when they were very young that we coached? Or it just might
It was just soccer. It was soccer. It wasn't.
was
Jared
soccer.
never played baseball,
Yeah.
but Adam and Jared and your Adam played soccer together.
Yeah, and just remembering just, you know, that lovely boyhood time. So thank you for the film, you know, for the remembrances, and also thank you. I love the rituals around Kaddish. I've always thought that we Jews have really gotten it right around the different mourning customs, and having lost my parents, my in-laws, other people, and having been through, I just love the way that you personalized through your artwork the Kaddish, which gives just more meaning to Kaddish, and as you've been expressing, you know, more meaning to your art. So, you know, thank you for the, you know, for doing both. And he's in our hearts and memories.
Thank you. It's my honor. That's beautiful, Stephen. Thank you.
Sylvia Schatz. Oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brenda. You're muted.
Hi,
Hi.
Brenda.
Hi, Steve. I think the last time I saw you, unfortunately, was in the year 2005. And I just lost my mom. And I remember walking into Mishkan Tefillah and seeing you and Ellen's being there. And after a few days, I thought, well, why are you there? And then I went up to you and you told me about Jared. And I was devastated. And you and Ellen were there every night. And I have to tell you, I mean, I was mourning my mother, but I was mourning your son as well. I remember Adam and Jared playing soccer, and you were the coach. Always with the ball, bouncing the ball, incredible. And that's my memory of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda.
So I'll just say a personal thing is I think that there's such power in stories and keeping our memories alive, and the person is kept alive through those stories. You know, my dad's long gone, but my kids know him through those stories. And we now know Jared through this story and through your story. And thank you for sharing it. It's very, very powerful. And as you said, you know, you want him to be alive in spirit, and I truly believe he is. So it's okay. Any other questions or comments that people want to unmute themselves? Please do so.
Unmute, Deborah. Yeah.
Okay, where can you buy the bowls? You said there were still some available.
Yes. So Terry, maybe you could email everybody the.
Yeah, Jen said if you want to be on the mailing list for the film, that you can go to.
That's something separate.
But that's something separate. Okay, so
Yeah.
I will get this information and I will send it out.
Yeah.
I think Marissa
just put it in there.
On the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, the website. So there's a way to contact Steve directly.
Yeah, and then you can email it also, in case people don't get a chance to copy it from the chat.
So can you just talk a little bit about visiting the school that Jared went to, Alfred? That must have been very difficult.
Yeah, that was.
And I know you didn't go for a while, so.
That was a devastatingly emotional experience. I was there for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And the way that came about was one of the teachers there at Alfred is a world-renowned raku artist and teacher, and he had always taught this 2-week adult masterclass in raku at Alfred, And he called me in December of that year, and he asked me if I would come and teach that class. And he was one of Jared's mentors. I thought about it, and I decided that this was another one of these opportunities that presented itself that I couldn't ignore. And when Jared passed away, when Jared left Alfred on his medical leave, we stored all of his stuff in a storage locker that friends of ours had there. And Ellen and I knew that at some point we were going to have to go back to Alfred and retrieve his things. And the years went by, and the years went by, and the years went by, and this opportunity presented itself. So I decided to go. And Alfred is one of these places where you can't get there from here. It's like a 5.5-hour drive. It's, if anybody's driven through the lower, the lower tier of New York State, it's beautiful, but it's boring. And we had done it so many times while Jared was there over the 3 years that he was there, that the drive was okay until I got when I got to Corning, which is the big city before you get to Alfred. I began to feel a little emotional. And then when I pulled into the town of Alfred and saw the town of Alfred's sign, I began to get teary-eyed. And then when I drove in and passed the Village of Alfred sign, which is where the school is, I had to stop the car. And literally, I'm there. I mean, I'm 3 blocks now from the school. I had to stop the car, and I was just sobbing. And then I pulled into the school, and the museum director, and who was also the director of adult ed and the summer program, came out to greet me. And I was just sitting in my truck, and I just couldn't get out. And she knew the whole story. She was very respectful. She took her time. And then I got out. She greeted me. We hugged. And then that started my 2-week experience there. And every step, and I expressed this in the film, every place I went there, every step I took, I was in the footsteps of Jared. This was his place. It was not my place. It was his place. And even though I had done a workshop while he was a student there for him and his students and the clay school, this was very different. This was a very different experience. And the area of the huge ceramic studio that they had carved out for me to teach this class, and there were a number of other clay classes going on at the same time, was, and I don't think this was intentional, this was where he worked. This is where he and his classmates worked. So there I was, literally in Jared's footsteps. And it was an emotional roller coaster all week that kind of climaxed when I went to the storage locker and physically touched his things and loaded them into my truck. It was devastatingly emotional.
I can't imagine what that took out of you, but I think it was important for you to be there.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions about the film. So I guess the best thing is to contact Jen, and I can send you her contact information. People are wondering how they can show it to other friends. There's a whole process, and you'll contact Jen. And Jen wants everybody to know that Fathers Forever group is a non-denominational group. It was an interesting mix of people.
Oh yeah.
So
You're gonna see.
Annette,
Yeah.
are you coming on here?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
I'm not asking a question.
Okay, then we'll just move on. I think we're at the end of our hour, and I just wanted to
Terry,
say,
before we close
yep.
up, there are two questions that were not asked that I
Okay.
suspect are on people's minds and may hit you later and say, oh my God, I didn't ask that question. So the first one was, why chawans? Why did I sit at my wheel and make a chawan? Why didn't I make a vase? Why didn't I make a plate? Why didn't I make a soup bowl? Why didn't I make something else? And Linda is a clay artist and a member of our studio, and a woman that I know for a long time. And she's shaking her head, yes, why?
That's my question.
Oh, okay, good.
Then go ahead, ask it, Linda.
How did you come to create Chawans and choose that? You know, probably not deliberately is my guess.
Not intentionally at first. I didn't go into the studio planning to make a Chawan.
Yeah.
So the way that happened was when I sat at my wheel. Well, first of all, the background of that is that Jared was the bowl. The simple bowl is as simple as it looks. Whether it's, and you all have bowls in your homes. You have bowls that you use exclusively for soup. You have bowls that you use exclusively for cereal, for ice cream, for fruit, for all kinds of different things. As simple as they look, they're the most difficult shapes for potters to make. To make a good bowl takes years of making bowls. And I had made thousands of bowls before that day that I sat down at my wheel with Jared in my mind. And Jared was a student of the bowl. He was a student of the bowl to such a high degree that not only his classmates, but his teachers at Alfred, and these are world-renowned clay people, would come and would kind of meditate with Jared over his bowls and ask them about him. And they learned as much about the bowl from Jared as he learned from them. And one of the bowls that he was devoted and dedicated to and a student of was the Chawan, the Japanese tea bowl, the Japanese style tea bowl. And there are very specific characteristics and requirements for a bowl to be a Chawan. The basic shape, the weight, the diameter, the form of the inside, the way it feels in your hand, and a variety of other things. And he was a student of that. And of all the thousands of bowls that I made before that day, I knew that some of them were purchased and used for tea, and some were purchased and actually used in the tea ceremony, although I never felt presumptuous enough or educated enough to call any of the bowls that I made Chawans. There's a spirit, there's a spiritualness, there is an imbued emotion and personality that makes a bowl a Chawan. So when I sat down at that wheel, I just made my first Chawan. And that's how it happened. There was no plan. I could have made anything, but it became a Chawan. And that was the first Chawan that I had made after making thousands and thousands of bowls in my career up to that point.
You had one other question?
Yes, the other question is, nobody's asked me what my reaction was the first time I saw the film.
Oh.
Who would like to know the answer to that question?
We'd all like to know.
when the and Bruce are raising their hands. When Jen started the production of the film, very early on, she asked me to watch segments of it. And I immediately said no. And I said no out of respect to Jen as an artist. And she asked me, out of her respect to me as an artist, essentially asking me for creative input. You know, how does this look? Blah, 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 blah. And I said to her, I said, Jen, you're the artist, I'm the subject. When I sit down at my wheel and make pots, I'm not making pots by consensus. I don't ask people for their input. I don't care about their input. I'm making work. I'm speaking to the clay. I'm making my work. I'm communicating. I'm speaking through the language of clay. And Jen respected that for the entire production of the film. And it was a 5-year project. Finally, last spring, when she had a director's cut, which was not the completed version of the film by any means, but it was enough. She said, Steve, I've respected you all this time. I don't respect you anymore.
I didn't say that part.
No, she didn't say that part. She said, you have to see this version, and you have to see it, not for creative input, but you have to see it to make sure that there's nothing in there that you don't want in there, that there's nothing that we've omitted that you feel is really important that must be in there. You have to see it for accuracy. We can't make any mistakes in pronunciation, in spelling, in definition, in meaning, and anything like that. So I acquiesced, I watched it, and it was so viscerally painful, but not in a bad way. It was just an unbelievable experience that I can't even remember. And I gave her my input, and then I didn't see it again until it debuted, had its world premiere at the Toronto Jewish Film Festival.
Yeah, okay.
And by the time I sat here on my couch with my wife and watched it, it was basically the first time I'd ever seen it. And what I remember from watching it is that Ellen kept poking me, saying, "You have to stop crying. You have to stop crying. You have to stop crying."
And we want to know about your other son, Adam.
Oh yeah,
What's he
Adam.
doing?
He was doing great. So he lives in Portland, Oregon with his family. He's the father of our 2 grandchildren. Serena is 6 and Maya is 4.5. And he went to Skidmore College and majored in studio art and art history and Spanish language and culture. And he still does some art. He does more hands-on stuff. He builds furniture and stuff like that. But he's the e-commerce and brands director for a company called Atrium Innovations, which is a worldwide company division of Nestle that makes nutritional supplements. So he manages a $70 million segment of their corporation. My daughter-in-law is a psychiatrist. She's the chief of psychiatric trauma at the University Hospital.
Wow.
And we haven't seen them in a year now.
Soon, we hope
Thank God
soon.
for Zoom. Right. Thank God for Zoom.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's wonderful. He's doing great. He's an athlete. He's a former professional cyclist and did all kinds of sports growing up. And Dan also knew him well, and Brenda and Steve knew him.
Yeah. Well, another cyclist wants to join in here. Frank Aronson, jump in.
I'd like to offer an observation. I didn't meet Stephen until after Jared had died, but I've gotten involved over the years, and I think it was Bruce Landon who made a comment about the spandex. Well, that spandex has actually got a name. We call them kits. And I've got a number of kits of the team that Stephen founded, partly in memory of Jared, Team Kermit. Kermit was Jared's favorite childhood character, right, Stephen?
Yep.
So it never really dawned on me, or I never really noticed too much. The JMB on every single jersey I have that's a Team Kermit jersey. And between watching the film and participating tonight, every time I put one of those on now, I'm going to take a long look at that and have a long memory. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you, Frank. That
So,
really touches my heart.
Any other final questions, comments? Okay, well, I want to thank Jen for making the film and working with Steve. It's a beautiful tribute to Jared. And I think that the film will help others through their own journey of loss when they see this film. You know, I think it touches everybody differently. And I just want to say, may Jared's memory be a blessing and a comfort to you and your family always.
Thank you.
Because it's just beautiful. So a couple of pieces of, ending
Housekeeping?
things. Yeah, housekeeping, that's the word. I want to thank our Zoomer behind the scenes. Caitlin is here. She's helped make this happen all tonight, so we couldn't do it without her. The next program for our Death Cafe initiative is on March 7th. It's we are inviting Margie Sokol back to, she's from JF and CS, and she'll be talking about Jewish teachings on the afterlife. The Death Cafe continues. I know it's a weird title, but it's we continue. And if you have ideas and topics for speakers, please let me know. Give me an email. And I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And once again, a very, very special thank you to Jen and to Steve for being with us, and all their friends who came.